Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast, navigating business and natural health and functional medicine, where we bring you insights and strategies to help grow your practice and amplify your impact. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast. I'm Dr. Tracey. I am the Chief Health and Growth Officer right here at Get Healthy Store, who sponsors and hosts this podcast every month with an incredible new guest each month and topic. And today I'm completely honored to have Dr. Drew Kidder here from CellCore, where we're going to talk about nutrient deficiencies in a toxic world. And I think this is a huge topic that isn't discussed enough. So, Drew, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tracey. It's an honor to be here. I always love connecting with you and the Get Healthy audience. So this is awesome. What a great way to kick off 2026.
I know, right? And we love CellCore. All of our practitioners love CellCore. You still remain one of the top brands and sellers through our catalog. So it does show a few things about your brand, quality customer service, as well as effective results. And I think that's what everybody's looking for. Yeah. So just to set the precedence for this podcast today, just for our listeners, we're going to be talking about three basic categories of toxicity, because we could talk about hundreds of things, I feel.
Sure.
Then Dr. Drew is going to also talk about some solutions that our practitioners can put into action for their clients and patients who are suffering maybe from exposure of these things. So just for general purposes, so everybody understands, when you say toxicity, can you just give us in context, what are you talking about?
Well, a lot of times we throw out, toxins, right? And are we really talking toxins, or are we talking toxicants, right? Because, truly what we're most often looking at when we are discussing heavy metals, mold, environmental toxins, the inevitable pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all of those things, those are truly toxicants. So what are we exposed to through the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the chemicals that we use in our homes, on our bodies? And I shouldn't say we, because I know you and I don't, but they are so pervasive in society nowadays.
Yeah, and we certainly try to avoid those things, but something, they're just inevitable. You can't avoid everything. You walk outside. I mean, I live in a pretty rural area of my town, but right across the street is the state park. I don't know what all they do inside that park. I know people live by or on golf courses. You look at the skies and you can see chemtrails, the air pollutants. I'm in Pennsylvania, so it's farm country. What are they spraying on their crops? So I'd like to get into the categories that you feel are most important to address. And within those categories, what are the things we really need to worry about, and how are they impacting our nutrition for our body? I mean, is there an impact? What could the result of that impact be? So I'm going to kind of let you take the front and just start off with the categories you want to discuss, and then I'll have questions you pose those categories out.
Sure. Can we take, just because we kind of unpacked like what those are, those different toxicants, but I'm a researcher. You and I, we love looking. It's not just our opinion. It's the research, the data out there. And I always like to share kind of how did we get here in the first place? Why are these, things so pervasive? And so, there have been some amazing eye-opening studies over the past several years. Kind of, I've looked at a few studies recently as a result of since 2022 and beyond. But one of them was a great study that came out looking at the U.S. basically issued some warnings on forever chemicals, right? Those PFOS and PFAS that are classified as forever chemicals. And as their name implies, they last forever in our environment, in our bodies. So they were discovered, I'm sure you probably know the background, but they were discovered in the late 1930s, right around 1940 by accident. They, were doing research on a refrigerant, and they discovered this very anti-stick chemical that it kind of makes me think, this time of the year of the Chevy Chase, vacation movie, and what was it that he had the non-caloric silicone, kitchen lubricant, right? That he sprayed on his kid's sled. But that was kind of the discovery of these that now are in our nonstick cookware and anti or flame retardant and water resistant clothing and carpet and furniture, and they're in nail polish, and they're in chemicals that are used in our homes. And what's scary is the EPA even came out and said back in like 2016 that, well, the acceptable amount in our water supply is around 70 parts per trillion. Well, then they pumped the brakes, and a few years later in 2020, they said, no, 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 no. It should only be zero point zero 0.02 parts per trillion. That's a big difference between 70 and zero point zero 0.02. Well, another 3 years went by and they finally landed on the fact that, well, it's acceptable to have 4 parts per trillion in our air supply, in our water supply. But what was crazy is a couple of years back, the three biggest chemical suppliers of those ingredients, I think it was DuPont, Corteva, and Chemours, or a company like that, settled a $1 billion lawsuit
Yeah.
on, basically saying, hey, we recognize that we've been allowing these to be dumped into the water supply. So what is that doing, to us? We can
Right.
look, we can look at, some of the others with in children, a couple of studies. The CDC came out and said that, a study had been done on like 650 children, and they found the pesticide glyphosate, Roundup, in the urine of 87% of the children that were tested.
Hmm.
What is that doing to these kids? They did another study that same year, I think, and they about the same robust population of kids 4 to 8 years of age, and they found that phthalates were detectable in their urine. Well, we know phthalates are oftentimes in topicals, right, for lotions and sunscreens, but they're known endocrine disruptors, hormone disruptors in 4 to 8-year-old children. So what impact is that going to have on those kids, long term? They're not in a real hormone influx at that age, but how much is it going to impact their hormone balance as they, mature? How much is it going to impact, them once they hit child rearing ages? It's frightening to me. It's frightening to me for my children, my grandchildren, all of that. So,
And already. I mean, if you look at our population as a whole, right, we have more children with multiple chronic diseases
yeah,
under the age of 12 than ever before. We have more infertility in
sure.
girls between the age of 20 and 35 than ever before. So we're seeing the impact of when this all kind of started with the green revolution in the 1960s. And we had the idea that if we genetically modify some rice and make it golden rice and help kids in third world countries, it started out as a good thing. But then
Right.
that genetic modification could cross barriers and we could have crops that survive longer in colder temperatures. And then we could have wheat products that were shorter but had more wheat sprouting. So we started to genetically modify these plants that were unnatural in the environment,
hmm
onset of the herbicides and the pesticides that we then had to use, plus chemical farming, right? The things that we had to feed the plants with because they were no longer able to sustain life naturally in the world that they once could, but prior to genetic modification.
Right.
The manipulation that we see from science that it starts out with good intentions, but what do they say about good intentions? Isn't the path
Mm,
paved in good intentions? And here we are all these years later, and we have more chronic disease, more infertility, cancer
absolutely.
exploding. I mean, I do an entire quarterbacking cancer program, and I train people to be specialists in it. We have seen cancers that are not only in younger populations, like cancers that we haven't seen in 20 and 30-year-olds that were typically for 40, 50, and 60-year-olds,
Right.
and the way the cancer works. The adaptability of the cancer cell is different. So
hmm
requiring more. And I do believe that if we can address for people and for practitioners listening today, the toxins and how they deplete nutrition and how they deplete systems of development and detoxification, that we can get a jump,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Next generation coming up. And also for mothers that are pregnant and fathers. Did you see the new study on neurodivergent issues in children? Kids with,
Hmm.
I know we want to blame one particular thing for that,
Sure.
but kids that don't receive any childhood inoculations or vaccines are now actually developing neurodivergent issues because of the toxicity of the mother and father. I mean,
Right. Right.
it's incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, you touched on a couple of really great points, and I always say it's a one-two punch, right? Not only are we dealing with that daily toxic burden, even, and you make a very good point that we can do as much as we want and can do in our environment, but we're not John Travolta, the boy in the bubble. I'm dating myself,
My
with
gosh, I just thought of that movie the other day. I can't
yeah.
brought that up. I didn't realize that's who it was. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
it was John Travolta. So, we can't live in that bubble because, as you said, we go outdoors and we're bombarded. You see the studies now on Parkinson rates with people that live close to a golf course. And it's the families I always love that say, well, we don't use any pesticides, herbicides, fungicides on our lawn. Yeah, but you spend 4 or 5 days a week with your children playing youth soccer and baseball and all of that, or you do live on, a golf course. So we're hit with that toxic burden. But then we also, you touched on just the nutrient depletion from agriculture, from our farming practices. And I think it was November of last year, 2023, not 2020, or sorry, 24. That did you see that they said that an apple today contains 38% less nutrients than an
Mhm.
apple in the 1950s?
I know.
So how much of it is over farming and we're depleting, the soil? So then we talk about how we're impacted by this toxic burden that our body doesn't even have the innate ability to detoxify. So let's kind of unpack those because you said we want to look at, some of the categories, if you will, of toxic burden. So we can look at the things like, outdoor air pollutants from walking outside. We can look at things like heavy metals, right? We can look at indoor, pollutants and toxicants because of, as I mentioned, some of those chemicals that are used. The paint on our walls, the chemicals in our carpet, in our furniture, in houses nowadays, the cabinets, are off-gassing chemicals. So, that's an additional category in addition to things like mold and mycotoxins because of water damaged buildings and all of that. Um, Another big one that gets missed is radon, right? Radon gas that obviously there are some areas of the country because we can talk about that if you want, but radon is as a result of uranium, right? Uranium in the soil and that decay of normal rocky soil, but how that leaches into our homes from either not having a foundation that it leaches from the soil or gaps in foundations, gaps around pipes, all of that, but how detrimental. In fact, it's the number two leading cause of lung cancer next to smoking. So, we have things like radon gas, and then we have the inevitable inhaled pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, chemical toxins, intoxicants, in our from industry and that type of thing. So,
Yeah.
uh, I guess let's look at, maybe that first category with kind of looking at more of the outdoor pollutants and heavy metals.
Yeah.
So where do we get those from? We get them from industrial emissions. We get them from areas of the country that have more manufacturing facilities. We get them from vehicle, exhausts in highly populated areas of the country. Even like in my part, you say here you are in Pennsylvania and you're dealing with, agriculture. We're in a big agricultural area in Boise, Idaho, and just we do grow more than potatoes, just so everyone knows.
Sure.
Uh, but we also deal with wildfires. We have rampant wildfire season. So it's not just, as I tell people all the time, it's not just the fires and the chemicals that are, or the byproducts that are in the fires. It's what are those fires also burning?
Right.
If they're burning structures, what's being emitted into the air? If it's burning agricultural land, what is, are those crops being sprayed with that now is being emitted into the air? So we look at, gases, nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide and benzenes and toluenes and all of these chemicals. But then even the metals, the things like mercury and arsenic and cadmium and what those how those chemicals interfere with our physiological processes and oftentimes even interrupting hormonal production. They can sit in the receptors of hormones. They can cause gut dysbiosis. That's certainly a biggie with heavy metals is they commonly will throw off, a good, healthy microbiome. And so, where are many of our vitamins in our body metabolized, Tracy?
Right. In our digestive
In
system.
our
So
digestive system, right? So,
eh, Hippocrates was right all those years ago.
right, right, for sure. So, certainly, heavy metals and those outdoor air pollutants can be one of them. Indoor toxins, like I said, mold, you look at the VOCs, you look at formaldehyde, you look at phthalates, as I mentioned. Mold and mycotoxins are biggies, and that's certainly one of, CellCore's fortes. We do a lot in working with practitioners who address the physiological impact of mold and mycotoxins. But, what are they disrupting? Oftentimes they're disrupting nutrient metabolism, things even putting more physiological demands on our body for antioxidants. Because here's the reality under more toxic burden, more toxic demand, or I should say, that toxic burden, what does it do? It puts our more demand on our body. We deplete those stores. So for, phase one, phase two liver detox, what all our bodies are all of a sudden saying, we need more antioxidants. We need more vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium. We need more glutathione. We need B complex. We need magnesium, all of those things because our bodies are doing the best they can to fight, but we're depleting those stores.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize the deficiencies. I always say there's only two paths to disease, toxicity and deficiency.
Right.
Not that complicated. We like to make everything really complicated, but it's complicated.
Yep.
And you can fill gaps and you can put band-aids on things, but if you don't get to the root as to why this is happening, then you're constantly going to be battling dis-ease of the body.
Yep.
And mold and mycotoxins has really amplified in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, it wasn't such an issue. And
Sure.
I really worked with a guy who owned a company that goes in and remediates mold.
Hmm.
And I said, I bet you see a lot of mold in old houses. And he said, actually not.
Hmm.
He said, old
New.
have a lot of ventilation.
Yep.
He said, that draft from your grandma's, living room. He said that ventilation and air actually keeps mold from growing. And he said the houses weren't built as tightly as.
Tight and sealed. Yep.
That's right. And he said, you have wood that is stored somewhere, not properly treated. You come and you build your brand new house. And I'll tell you, it's harder to convince somebody that has a brand new house to do mold and mycotoxin testing that it
Yep.
is someone who lives in a house that was built in the 1920s.
Yeah.
They'll say, my house is new. How can I have mold? And so I have to go through the explanation of it to get them to understand. So for practitioners listening, you know, I also think that EMFs are driving some of the mold and growth of the mold because we do know
Hmm.
studies. I don't know if you ever read the book, The Invisible Rainbow. Have you ever read that?
I haven't. No.
There's one for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so basically, with the onset of any new frequency development, whether it's radio frequency or EMF, there was a corresponding uh, epidemic of disease. So when they released radio waves, you had this,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. And this guy hypothesizes that these EMFs or frequencies at these higher levels are actually disrupting our microbiota base of the planet, whether it's, on plants, animals, people, and it creates a wave of immunorepression. So
Hmm.
it's an interesting read of like
Yeah.
with every single epidemic that we've seen, there was something that was released right before it. And you can take
Well,
that
and
all
that makes sense because you look at nowadays, I always encourage people go onto Amazon, buy an EMF meter. They're
right.
cheap. They're 35, $40. You will be floored as you walk through your home and are testing,
Yes.
areas that were bombarded with that electrical field.
Yeah.
We've got Wi-Fi and, you look at sometimes how many devices are in a home between phones and iPads and televisions in multiple rooms and all of that emitting, those electromagnetic frequencies. So,
I'm old enough to remember the first not the first microwaves, but I remember my grandmother's microwave with the dial,
oh
and I
yeah,
stood right in front of it and watched the food spin. I'm sure I was radiated well when I was like 5 years old.
yep,
Probably explains a lot about me. But with that said, they were doing studies on, candida and different molds and bacterias, and the amplification of their growth rate was like 25 times when
sure.
exposed to a microwave level, which is about 25 hertz of electromagnetic frequency. And so if we think about 5G, we think about, I mean, just these things we hold in our hands all the time,
Hmm.
these computers, so important that practitioners are paying attention to how much EMF exposure is in one household that might
Sure.
have mold. And it's something that I'll ask people when, we're doing a mold test for the house or a mycotoxin test for them is how much EMF exposure do you have in
Hmm.
your house? Like, do you have a Wi-Fi amplifier? Like, what's going on? How many computers do you have? I mean, these kids, my kids, they got computers in the rooms. They got
Yep.
TV. Everything's a smart TV. Everything's smart. I'm
Yeah.
suddenly the smartest one anymore. It's a TV. So these are all things that we need to pay attention to. So I'm glad you brought up mold because I think it's a big one. But there's other contributors out there that
Yeah.
I also think because mold is so big, we're forgetting about these other toxins that you're talking about, which are
Yep.
so relevant.
Well, and I love to hear, I would venture to guess that you either spoke with Brian or Corey, on that, from mold remediation.
Corey. It was
What's,
Corey.
of course, yeah. See, we know all the same
The
people.
dust test, right?
Yes, because I've had that same great conversation, that people do think, well, I don't live in an older home, I live in a newer home. And to your
Right.
point, everything is so tight, so sealed, creating an environment that just allows those mycotoxins to proliferate. And then, what do we know? People can't get healthy in the same environment they got sick. So it's all well and good that we do great testing on our bodies to identify, are we dealing with mycotoxin, issues?
Right.
We can do great CellCore, obviously, great, mold and mycotoxin, programs to bind to those toxins, remove them, upregulate mitochondria, all of that. But you also have to be looking at, well, what am I going to do to fix the environment?
Yeah.
So
But you just made a really good point because I really think the kill mentality has been part of the natural world, like in the allopathic, right? We like to kill
sure.
things, kill bacteria and kill mold and kill viruses, but we forget about the fill part of it, the mitochondrial regeneration, the ability to recover. So that's what I love about your CellCore protocol. So if you can just walk us through maybe just the mold protocol real
Yeah.
quickly. Why did you put it together the way you did? And where is the amplification for recovery? When does that come in? Just kind of quickly walk through it because I know a lot of the practitioners use your line.
Sure, sure.
It's not
And yeah, most people know that, the foundation of CellCore was really built on first and foremost, we have to upregulate mitochondria in every organ, gland, and cell in the body. Because how can we expect, let's just say, how can we expect to detoxify? How can we expect to support phase one and phase two of liver detoxification if we are not supporting the mitochondria within the liver? right?
Right.
So let's look at what do we do to not only, and this is important because we have multiple products within the CellCore line that are mitochondrial support, but they're all designed for different mitochondrial function. Not only, in some cases, we have our products that help with the fulvics and humics to support the nutrients, give the nutrients necessary for mitochondrial support, right? Necessary for that Krebs cycle. We also want to do as much as we can to support the mitochondrial membrane
Mhm.
because that is where ATP is produced in the mitochondria. It's produced in that inner mitochondrial membrane, which is, Tracey, very susceptible to toxic burden, toxic damage. So,
Mhm.
all of these things that we're talking about, the environmental toxins and heavy metals and molds and mycotoxins, they are causing impact on damage, oxidative stress, ROS factors, impacting the mitochondrial membrane where energy is produced. So protect that membrane, but then also upregulate and actually help with mitochondrial biogenesis, help with the production of new mitochondria. You're so super smart that I can never tell you anything new, but I'm sure you know that I
Here's through.
a lot
Yes.
of people don't realize, Tracey, prior to 2010, guess what? We used to think that there were only two ways to create new mitochondria, and those were fasting, because in a fasting state, when your body is not getting glucose to convert to, you know, pyruvate to acetyl CoA to ATP, what do we have to do? We have to have more, more of the powerhouses on board. So create more mitochondria to create more energy.
Mhm.
So fasting was one. The other was exercise, because when we exercise, we deplete that energy. So again, we need to bring more mitochondria on board to produce more energy. Well, it was around 2010 that they actually discovered some really interesting ingredients. And one of those ingredients is in one of our new products, Mitoactive, that is PQQ, or pyrroloquinoline quinone, that is shown to actually decode the basically the DNA from your DNA, the coding through PGC1 alpha to create new mitochondria. So, what do we want to do when we're going through a detox protocol? We want to make sure that we're protecting our mitochondria, we're feeding our mitochondria, and we're bringing on new mitochondria to actually give the body the ability to detoxify from that toxic burden. But what's also, as super, super important is to also deal with drainage before detoxification. We can't
Yep.
just push the release of toxins if those toxins can't get out of the body. So what do we
That's right.
do? We support, our drainage funnel, which is, our colon, our lymphatics, our glymphatic system, draining the brain all the way to the cellular level and making sure that once those toxins are mobilized, we can actually get them out of the body, which is,
Right.
critically important.
Yeah. Elimination pathway opening essential. I always called them the bowls, the bowels, the urinary, the lungs, the lymph, the skin. And
Yeah,
most elimination pathways are dual, right? Like the skin is an exit, but it's also an absorbent.
sure.
So it matters what we put on our skin. It
Yeah,
matters.
yep,
It's an SOS, a source of stress.
yep.
So talked about some of these outdoor pollutants. We've talked a little bit about the indoor pollutants.
Hmm.
Talk to me more about the radon because
Yeah,
that was a 1980s scare tactic. It was a long
right.
where your kids are at 10 o'clock. Everyone had a radon detector. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's overlooked, very often in, the ionizing radiation and, the ROS factors that occur because of radon are incredibly problematic. As I said, it is well documented that next to smoking, radon is the next highest cause of lung cancer, right? So again, like the mold and mycotoxins, dealing with whether it's in our body or in our homes, we have to look at what do we do to mitigate that? How do we, deal with it? Well, first of all, you can get a home radon test super cheap. You can buy one yourself for like 40 or $50, or you can usually have someone, come out and do it in your home for around $100. And oftentimes they'll do multiple tests because they want to see, impact different times of the year, that type of thing. But getting it tested is critically important. But radon causes massive mitochondrial dysfunction.
Mm.
That ROS, that oxidative stress to the mitochondria is really pervasive. Massive, massive genomic instability, hence why it's such a causative factor with cancer, being carcinogenic. So not only just lung cancer, but lung damage, in general, you'll see in regions of the country, regions of the world that have more prevalent, radon. Again, I mentioned at the onset, comes from, uranium
Right.
from rocky, soil, and it's a natural byproduct, right? And it's released, but the problem is it's released and typically would dissipate into the air that wouldn't be problematic. But when it's in the confines of your home, getting up through the soil, through your foundation, through cracks in the foundation, around pipes, that come up for your plumbing and everything else, it can easily be sealed off and it can easily be, mitigated and dispersed because typically all they do is vent. If they have tested for it, they vent, from your basement outside instead of it venting up through your home. So, in the case of radon, we just have to make sure that we're upregulating those antioxidant pathways, that we're making sure we're giving the body all the supportive, nutrients to be able to properly, again, detoxify and get those out of the body.
Absolutely. Again, why we love the CellCore line because you have great protocols that take you from to be able to, mitochondrially, ATP, energy wise, to elimination pathways being opening, and then targeted therapies to help pull those toxins from the body. So,
Right.
if you haven't explored CellCore in the catalog at Get Healthy, I would recommend you go do that now. Or you can go to their website and you can establish a wholesale account as a practitioner. Lots of education over there. They have great reps, great events. Definitely something I would recommend everyone do. So let's talk a little bit about these chemical toxins category.
Yeah.
We kind of have about 20 minutes left to get through all of them. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, when we look at kind of the inhaled, whether it's inhaled pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, whether it's chemical toxins, what are some of the common exposures? They're through agriculture, right? Roundup being one of the biggies. We certainly can't get away from it. Glyphosate. And I always like, I mean, this is probably, redundant for a lot of people, but I like to paint a picture of why it's as problematic as it is, right? And, now there obviously have been class action lawsuits filed against, the suppliers, Monsanto and everything because of, I think it was in California, it was in a couple of years back with the landscaper, that filed because of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But I like to go back to like why in the first place it actually was approved for use in our country because a lot of people aren't aware of that backstory. They know that, it's been around for a very long time, but in its infinite wisdom, the FDA said, well, you know what? It's not problematic for humans. And why is that, Tracey? Because humans don't contain the shikimate pathway,
Great. Dr.
right?
Stephanie, right?
Dr. Stephanie Seneff, right? Well, what is that shikimate pathway? The shikimate pathway is the pathway used by bacteria, fungi, plants to to manufacture amino acids. And because they can, unlike, I mean, humans can manufacture, some amino acids, but we also have essential amino acids that we have to take in through our dietary intake. But the FDA said, well, it's safe for humans because the mechanism that it's working on in plants and in bacteria and fungi and all these pests is it's destroying their body's ability to, or their ability to create these amino acids by disrupting the shikimate pathway. So it kills them as a result of that.
Right.
But humans don't have it, therefore it's not harmful to humans. Well, guess what does have it?
I know, but I won't
The,
spoil.
the bacterial flora in our gut. So, is it any coincidence that over the decades that we have seen the rapid rise worldwide until many countries, and they're smarter than us in many ways, banned it from use? We saw this rise of use of glyphosate. We saw this rise of gastrointestinal issues, digestive issues, autoimmune conditions. It's not coincidence,
Yeah.
And so we're bombarded every day. To your point, again, to circle back around, we can't live in a bubble. We can control the foods we eat. Are we eating organic food, produce and meats? But do you go outside living in Pennsylvania, living in Idaho, and just because of the wind currents, we are being, impacted by
Mhm.
pesticides, herbicides, fungicides every single day,
Right.
walking outdoors, right? But what impact do many of those have? They're proven to be neurotoxic. They're proven, as I said, to have GI impact because of disrupting the normal bacterial flora. They're shown to be, endocrine disruptors impacting hormonal, metabolism in our bodies, in large part because they can actually compete for that receptor site on the cell where normally, hormones would attach to that receptor, but instead we'll see that some of these pesticides and estrogens and whatnot will actually sit in that receptor instead. So this is causing massive depletion of detox supporting nutrients, things like our magnesium, our B vitamins, our glutathione, levels that are already declining as we age, but that because of what we're being impacted with every day, it's causing that further depletion.
Yeah. And the glyphosate alone, like if you just talk about that one, I mean, it's more powerful than EDTA, 300 times more powerful.
Yeah.
So it's going to bind to all the minerals in the soil. We eat the plants that have, as you were mentioning before, 30 to 40% less mineral,
Less.
less nutrition. So we're not getting our nutrients from food like we used to.
Right.
And then, the microbiota disruption, that's going to lead to serotonin dopamine balance. How many neurological issues are we seeing today? Just on the spectrum of kids, ADD,
Hmm.
as we talked about earlier, neurodivergent issues in children that are unvaccinated because of the toxicity level of the parents. So
Right.
that's a depletion issue, right? That's a
Yeah.
serotonin dopamine issue. That's an inflammatory pathway issue, an immune response issue, so on and so forth. And then you were mentioning the amino acid depletion. How
Hmm.
many systems in our body use amino acids? Every single one of them.
Well,
Aren't.
and like I tell people all the time, guess what? One of the conjugation pathways in phase 2 of liver detoxification is it's amino acid conjugation, right? If we don't have those, are not supplying those nutrients, we are going to automatically be depleted in one of the very pathways that the body does properly detoxify. So just destroying the body's innate ability to, because that's always an argument, right? Or a debate, because many people go, integrative functional root cause practitioners, they always are like detox, detox, detox. The body has the ability to detox on its own. I don't disagree. Our
Right.
body was designed wonderfully to detox given the right circumstances. But so many people are so grossly depleted because even down to, as you said, food supply, the foods that our grandparents and great grandparents ate that helped their bodies detoxify back then, do not have the very building blocks, the nutrients, the amino acids, the vitamins, the minerals that, you know, it- food doesn't have it nowadays.
So you're not fueling the systems of
Yep,
elimination. They used to pick
exactly.
it from their backyard. We get it at the grocery store if you don't have a garden. And, usually that's not vine ripe. It's picked early, so it has a longer shelf life if it's GMO. And that's the thing. Like when I read Dr. Stephanie Snip's book, it's called Toxic Legacy for
Hmm.
anybody that wants to get it. It's an amazing read. She talked about the fact that GMO, non-GMO is not enough. You have to have the USDA certified organic non-GMO. She's like, that is a better step because there's certain criteria for glyphosate use within that they're not allowed to use. Now,
Yep.
obviously, we know people get around it, right? So it's important that I think that we tell practitioners today for us ourselves to take care of ourselves, but also for their patients, what's the daily dose that we should be giving our clients and patients from the CellCore line that I should put everybody on and say, this is your daily dose because you live on this planet and you're never
Yeah.
going to escape all the toxicity. So you need to take this particular product or two products daily so that you can detoxify and nutrify.
Yep.
What's the daily dose?
Because of that very reason, right? I am a nutrition Nazi, when it comes to my household. My children, laugh because now they're 20 and 22, and they go, well, we grew up in an ingredient household. Why?
Mm.
Because we didn't have all of the stuff like their friends had in their cupboards. And, I used to laugh because, my daughters would say, well, Dad, so and so's parents let them have this. And I would go, well, I love you more than they love, their parents love them. And I go, great, I'm going to get a phone call quick.
Getting called.
But
Mhm.
no, we still need it, right? I eat organic, but to your point, and it's a misconception as well that people think, oh, just because it's certified organic, the soil, even that organic foods can be grown in because they have not, in many cases, been historically organic farms. They may have been conventional farms that were then switched to an organic farm that meet the number of year criteria to say, okay, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides are clear, if you will, from the soil. But what about the damage that happened for the decades that people were farming, those? So I believe that everyone can benefit from a good multivitamin, mineral, supportive type product. We had been asked for years because we never had those types of products in, our catalog. And we had people say, well, why don't you? Because, we're talking about the importance of supporting the normal detoxin pathways in the body. So whether you're looking pre-protocol, say detox protocol, or during a protocol or post, we should be giving the body, again, the very building blocks, the vitamins, the minerals, the amino acids. So we released our core nutrients, our essentials for cellular vitality line, one of which is our core nutrients product. And, that's people can, find out more, of the exact ingredients and everything on that. But I tell people all the time, it's more than just a multivitamin and mineral. We really put some powerful, ingredients in that. Even things like the PQQ that I mentioned, the pyrroloquinoline quinone. It's not typically in a multivitamin and mineral product, but we wanted it there for that additional mitochondrial, support. Other great antioxidants, things like zeaxanthine and lycopene and boron, for some bone health. And so really, really, robust formulation. So that's one of my biggies that I recommend everyone can benefit from. Huge, obviously, supporter of anything mitochondrial, and I really do love the Mitoactive product that we released because it contains not only the PQQ for that mitochondrial biogenesis, but also contains CoQ10. And many people are like, oh, CoQ10, that's not very exciting. Well, when it comes to mitochondria, it's incredibly exciting
Very
because what is that transporter of electrons in the electron transport chain from complex 1 to complex 2 to complex 3? It's CoQ10.
Okay. Hmm.
So we not only have the fulvic and humic acids that are the suppliers of those electrons, but we also have the carrier for those. So absolutely love, the Mitoactive product. And then I'm a huge, huge fan. And, I brought the science to our team back in 2022 when I read the study out of Baylor University School of Medicine on glutathione. They did glutathione research. And we all debate in this industry what's the best form of supporting glutathione. Is it IV? Is it injectable? Is it liposomal? Is it oral? Right? And they all have their pros and cons, right? Oral is poorly absorbed, poorly metabolized, broken down into the amino acids, the building blocks, and then the body, putting those back together. But the actual resulting amount, that passes the digestive system is not favorable. So liposomals are great. Injectables are great. Many people don't like doing injectables. Not everyone has access to IVs. So the Baylor study showed that by giving Glynac, which is the combination of glycine and cysteine from the N-acetylcysteine, the rate limiting step in mitochondrial or in glutathione production, it resulted in a reduction of 9 hallmark signs of aging.
Wow.
I encourage everyone. I wish I could drop a link, to the study, in here, but it's compelling to look at it and go, don't we want to give the body the building blocks? And we know for decades now, we've looked at take N-acetylcysteine as that precursor to glutathione, but that's only one piece. What about glycine? They didn't include the third, which is, glutamic acid, because we typically, regardless of dietary intake, most people get enough in their diet. So they said it's not really necessary to supplement like it is with cysteine, the cysteine and the glycine. So 2 grams of that, compelling, changes in, again, those 9 hallmark signs of aging. So I started taking immediately when I read that. I just started taking 2 grams of the powders and swigging it down, and my wife hated it because it tasted terrible. So we came out with our Glynactive product
Mhm.
that is, again, those researched ingredients, the researched actual dosing from the studies to, create that endogenous production of glutathione, and it tastes really good. We kind of nailed the flavor on it without, artificial sweeteners and everything. So, I encourage people to try that.
Is more in product development to get a good flavor when you're trying to mask other things. And also,
Especially N-acetylcysteine, because it's
right,
sulfury, it's bitter, right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
smells, tastes bad. And then also get, low sugar, not
Right,
having
right.
sweeteners and things like
Yep.
that. So it's like just looking at the panel, guys, glycine, N-acetylcysteine, taurine, L-proline, milk thistle, ginger root, and the bioactive carbon technology, which is kind of
For
your
that delivery. Yep.
thick patented ingredient. The glycine, I know there's dimethylglycine and trimethylglycine. What
Hmm.
glycine was this?
I forget now. I'm not, it's been a while since I've actually looked at the supplement facts, so I'd have to dig into that.
Well, they can get on your website
Yeah.
and get a wholesale account and make sure. But just so people are aware, I mean, glycine, amino acid, methyl donor, as it breaks down through that
Huge. Yep.
pathway, it's huge. We use a ton of, DMG in
Hmm.
to enhance methylation,
Right.
because a lot of the zero receptors, such as, BRCA positive genes, where people get all tripped up and scared about that, that really only matters if you are a poor methylator.
Yeah.
And if you can fix the genetic expression, the epigenetic expression of that polymorphism, you won't express cancer. So, like triple negative breast cancer
Yeah.
is a product of poor methylation and a BRCA1. But if you fix the methylation, you don't express. So, these women are going around having double mastectomies because they had a genetic marker, but they never proved if it would ever express. And there are things that you can do and put into your life every day, such as something like this that would help the body not express epigenetically what could be. So,
It's almost like you were listening to the webinar that I taught the other day to a practitioner group because we were talking about, hormone balancing and estrogen metabolism and how sadly in the allopathic world, estrogen is so demonized. But if you look at the three different pathways, whether you're looking at 16 alpha or the 2 hydroxy, 4 hydroxy, there are favorable pathways and there are less favorable pathways. It's not estrogen that causes cancer, that causes, carcinogenic effects. It's the oxidation of that 2 hydroxy into quinones, the metabolites of estrogen. But what do you do, as you said, to mitigate that? Antioxidants, supporting those, pathways, making sure the COMT, pathways are supported. It's like you don't have to be afraid. You just have to be informed.
yeah, and it's a big undertaking for our world because our baseline of knowledge on hormones came from the allopathic. And I personally believe, as a woman, I can say this, that women's health from the get-go is probably next to psychiatry, the worst part of the allopathic. Uh,
Hmm.
you can just prescribe birth control for
Right.
teenage in a developmental stage without any blood work. Just
Yeah.
so you have an irregular menstrual cycle, have some birth control. Yeah,
Right.
pediatric, right? They just pill hop until they get the right suppression of the person's entire identity, but whatever.
Yeah.
So we need to do better as natural health integrative care practitioners to learn how to read testing and understand all of these pathways and how the toxicity impacts those and how the nutrient deficiency impacts those. We have to up our game. It's just the
Yeah.
same thing in cancer, Drew. I
Right.
watch empathic, right? As Dr. Goodyear says, the unholy trinity of surgery, chemo, and radiation. And that's the tip of the iceberg. And what I say is underneath the surface is red light therapy, peptides, missiles,
Hmm.
repurposed medication, like all of this research that's down below. But because we only get to see this much of what they have deemed as the way to do it, the same thing goes for hormones, female health. So we are so far ahead of that industry in cancer with the immunotherapy research and all that in the
Oh,
integrate.
absolutely. Yeah.
Are we as practitioners utilizing things like CellCore products
Yeah.
and patients? I know they make us think it's rudimentary. It's not.
No.
It's science that they don't know, which is why they try to crush it.
Yeah.
So I just want the practitioners to realize the power of your product line and why it's one of the top sellers, probably in the country, but definitely on our catalog.
Yeah.
How much we appreciate the thought and diligence that goes into that product line. So,
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. I will throw out one other, just quickly in kind of that stack, if you will. Firm believer, I'm going to say something, but I want to put it in the context. I truly believe that a binder today, utilizing a binder like, our biotoxin binder, our number one selling product in our line that, has extracts of humics and fulvics to bind onto, again, toxins, regardless of heavy metals, environmental toxins, mold, glyphosate, what have you. Binders are the modern day multivitamin. Not
absolutely.
saying it replaces a multivitamin, but it is as critically important because, as we have said numerous times in this last 60 minutes, we cannot avoid our exposure to toxic burden. So, upregulate the body's natural detoxification pathways, but also utilize a binder to bind onto those toxins.
Yep.
Super important strategy.
100% agree. I put everybody on a binder,
Yeah.
everybody. And people worry about that. And I'm like, just take it away from food, medications, anything else. Let
Yeah.
it do its job, right? A binder a day keeps disease away. That's what
Right.
it
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
take. So
Yeah.
you for being here. Thanks for all you do over at CellCore.
Thank
Guys,
you.
remember to reach out to CellCore, establish that wholesale account, get connected with their education and their upcoming event, which is always amazing. And make sure you add this product line to your catalog and get scripting because people aren't getting any healthier without your help.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Drew, for being here. Always a
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And just hopefully in closing, we identified a lot of scary stuff, but also know that there are solutions for it, right? That strategies that you can effectively address all of this, toxic burden and the mitochondrial dysfunction that we talked about. So we appreciate the support. We always love working with Get Healthy Store and your team. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, guys, share this with someone that it'll benefit. Have a great day.
Take care.